It began on an ordinary morning, the kind that fools you into thinking nothing will ever change. The city still whispered in rain, the coffee still steamed, and love still felt like a promise made of glass clear, delicate, impossible to break. But when Emily looked across the kitchen table, the man she had trusted for 10 years spoke 12 quiet words that shattered everything she thought she knew. And in that single breath, a wife became a witness, a lawyer became her own defense, and a story of betrayal became the beginning of her greatest reckoning. It began with the sound of a coffee cup breaking, a single, fragile note that sliced through the quiet of a Portland morning. Emily Carson stood in her kitchen, the faint smell of roasted beans and rain seeping through the open window. She had always loved mornings, their quiet rhythm, the promise of order before the world demanded too much. But that day, the air felt wrong. Heavy. Expectant. Ryan Cole entered, phone in hand, his tie still loose from the night before. He did not look at her when he spoke. "Emily," he said, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "I've hired a lawyer. You'll hear from him." At first, she thought she misheard. The sentence was too calm to be real. Her hand trembled slightly, the porcelain cup slipping from her grasp and shattering on the floor. Coffee spread like a dark bloom across the tiles. She wanted to ask why, but the words would not come. Years of courtroom training of controlling tone, tempo, and truth failed her completely. He finally looked up, his expression distant, almost bored. "It's better this way," Ryan added, adjusting his cufflinks as if closing a deal. "You'll get the email soon." Then he left. No argument. No hesitation. Only the click of the door latch and the echo of her own heartbeat filling the silence. Emily moved mechanically, cleaning the spill as if by doing so she could erase the moment itself. But the email arrived before the floor was dry. From Harrison and Blake LLP. Subject, Divorce Proceedings, Ryan Cole versus Emily Carson. Her breath caught. She sat at the kitchen counter, staring at the glow of the laptop screen. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the window pane like an impatient reminder that life, indifferent as ever, went on. For a long time, she did not open the file. She studied the sender's name, the firm's logo, even the neat typography, searching for any sign that this was a mistake. It was not. Finally, with a steadying breath, she clicked. The document unfolded like a betrayal written in legal language. Clause after clause stripped her of what she had helped build: the house, their savings, his company shares. Ryan's attorney had labeled nearly everything as separate property. In black and white, her decade of partnership had been reclassified as a financial inconvenience. Her mind shifted from shock to precision. Years of litigation discipline returned instinctively. She scanned the document again, slower this time, her lawyer's eyes catching the intent behind every sentence. Ryan wanted her gone with nothing. She rose from her chair, walked to the window, and watched the city blur beneath the rain. Somewhere downtown, her husband was probably sitting in his office, speaking confidently to his team, perhaps already planning a future that no longer included her. Emily whispered to herself, not as a lament but as a vow. "This is not how my story ends." The glow from the laptop illuminated her reflection in the glass pail, resolute, unfamiliar. A woman betrayed, yes, but also a woman awakening. On-screen text. Have you ever been blindsided by someone you trusted? Share your story in the comments. She turned back to the screen, reopened the email, and clicked the final attachment labeled Preliminary Asset Division. The numbers were precise. The intent was cruel. Her lips tightened into a faint, knowing smile, the kind that comes before a storm. Because for the first time since the cup had shattered, she remembered exactly who she was. A lawyer who understood how to read between the lines. And she had just found her first piece of evidence. The rain eased to a silver mist by noon, but inside the townhouse the air remained heavy and still. Emily returned to the kitchen table as if returning to a battlefield. The laptop waited, its pale light spilling across the stack of printed pages from Harrison and Blake. She read the draft again, not as a wife crushed by the words, but as a litigator who knew that language is a machine. Every sentence has a lever. Every lever has a point of force. There it was, repeated with clinical confidence. Separate business ownership. Ryan's counsel framed his company as an asset entirely insulated from the marriage. Profits, appreciation, goodwill, all listed as separate property. As she traced each line with her finger, she felt a slow burn climb her sternum. It was not only the audacity that startled her, but the calculation. He had set the table and expected her to accept the seat he assigned. She rose and walked down the hall to the guest room that had once been a shared office. A forgotten shelf held an old laptop in a cracked sleeve. The keyboard had a shallow dent where Ryan's thumbs had pressed too hard during late-night work. Emily plugged in the charger and waited. The hum of the fan filled the room, as familiar as an old lie. The login screen bloomed. Her hands did not tremble now. She typed the password that used to open everything in their life, a two-word phrase from an Oregon hiking trail they had loved years ago. The desktop appeared, cluttered with half-finished presentations, delivery schedules, and a folder labeled personal. She clicked. Inside was a second folder named RB. It looked innocuous, almost professional. She opened it and found screenshots of social media pages, email confirmations, and a browser shortcut pinned to the taskbar. The icon led to a profile that made her jaw tighten. Ryan Blake. Not Cole. Blake. The page loaded slowly, as if reluctant to reveal what it contained. When it did, the shape of the hidden life became clear. There was a photo of Ryan in a sunlit bar that she did not recognize, his arm around a young woman with pale hair and a soft, guarded smile. The caption read, "Friday, finally," and there were comments beneath from people who did not exist in their shared world. The woman's name was Chloe Hart, and Emily knew the name from stories Ryan once told about a promising junior employee who had left the company suddenly. He had described it as an unfortunate loss. The tone had been flat, rehearsed, and distant, much like his voice in the kitchen that morning. Emily clicked through the album. There were images of a cabin by a lake in late summer, a city rooftop lit with string lights in early fall, and a grainy video of a short trip labeled conference. In the background of one photograph, a sign gave away the date and the venue of a logistics expo. She remembered that week. She had worked a difficult civil mediation while he was, in his words, in panel discussions. At night, he had texted her one-line messages, often after midnight. Busy. Long day. Call tomorrow. She had believed him because belief had been easier than suspicion. Her breath slowed. She began to work as she had in her best cases. She would not accuse. She would prove. She saved images, archived posts, and pulled the source code for timestamps. She printed the clearest photographs and placed them on the table like a quiet procession. A calendar lay open next to them. She marked each date with a red pen, drawing a visible thread through weeks of absence, business trips, and careful lies. For a moment, her throat tightened. She remembered a night months earlier when Ryan had returned late, hair damp, shirt crisp, and eyes bright with a reserve of energy that did not belong to the hour. He had kissed her forehead without meeting her gaze. "You work too much, Em," he had said softly, as if it were a kindness. "You do not even see me these days." She had laughed it away and made him tea. The truth, laid bare now, was not a spectacle. It was a quiet corridor of doors left ajar. She turned back to the divorce draft and read with new clarity. The language about separate property was not careless. It was strategic. If she accepted it, the rest of the document would follow like dominoes. She opened the fireproof file box in the closet and removed a leather folder. Inside was the prenuptial agreement. They had signed it at a small oak table in her first office on a winter afternoon when the light had fallen early and everything had felt serious and hopeful. Emily set the prenup beside the draft and began to read. The introduction reaffirmed the voluntary nature of the agreement and a full financial disclosure at the time. The next pages set out what each party would keep in the event of dissolution. Then she reached a section she had not thought about in years, printed in a measured serif that made even harsh truths look reasonable. It was titled Business Appreciation and Misconduct Valuation. The clause was careful, narrow, and exquisitely constructed. It did not punish. It evaluated. In the event that marital misconduct is proven by admissible evidence, any appreciation in value of the operating business owned by either party during the marriage shall be subject to equitable distribution at 50% of fair market value, determined by an independent valuation as of the date of separation. She read it twice, then a third time, listening to the language settle into place like a key sliding into a lock. This was not a threat. It was a mechanism. It required evidence. It required process. It required the truth. Her mind mapped the strategy in clean lines. Step 1. Authenticate the social media account and the images. Step 2. Corroborate with travel records, conference registrations, and expense reports. Step 3. Seek discovery regarding business valuation and cash flows. Step 4. Retain an independent appraiser. Step 5. Let the machine of the clause do the work it was designed to do. She closed her eyes and let the quiet carry her for a count of 10. Grief rose and receded like a tide. It did not vanish, but it no longer dictated her next movement. When she opened her eyes, she saw the table as a timeline, not as an altar of loss. On one end lay the emails from Harrison and Blake. On the other lay photographs and receipts. Between them, the prenuptial agreement formed a bridge that belonged to her as much as it belonged to him. She printed the clause on a single sheet and placed it above the photographs. The ink was still damp, the letters clean and unambiguous. She reached for a pen and underlined the words equitable distribution and fair market value. Language that was not angry. Language that did not accuse. Language that simply aligned consequences with facts. In the hallway, the muted city sounded cautious and far away. She felt a steadiness return to her spine, a sense of proportion that had defined her work long before marriage had redrawn her map. She gathered the pages into a neat stack, slid them into a manila folder, and wrote a title in the corner, Evidence Packet A. For the first time that day, the corners of her mouth lifted. It was not triumph. It was recognition. Ryan had brought a lawyer to the table and believed he would script the outcome. But he had already scripted the rule that would govern him, and he had written it in the language of fairness. Emily looked down at the clause once more. The truth did not shout. It did not need to. It waited for light. She turned off the old laptop, sealed the folder, and set it beside the prenup. The room felt different as she switched off the lamp. Not lighter, but aligned. When she stepped back into the hallway, the rain had stopped. The window held a pale sky that promised no favors and offered no threats. She did not smile widely, only enough to acknowledge the quiet shift inside her. He had tried to hide a life in the shadows. He had also signed the instrument that would bring it into view. The Cafe on Alder Street was a quiet harbor in the late afternoon, all soft lamps and low conversation. Steam rose from polished cups like pale ribbons. Emily chose a table near the window where a maple tree held the light like a lantern. She placed the manila folder on the tabletop with deliberate care, as if setting down a compass that would not fail her. Jason Miller arrived on time. He was younger than she expected, with a careful haircut and a suit that tried a little too hard. He offered a practiced smile, a handshake that measured boundaries, and a lawyer's small talk about traffic and rain. When he sat, he aligned his pen with the edge of his legal pad, a quiet ritual of control. "Thank you for meeting me, Miss Carson," he said. "I represent Mr. Cole. I think we can move efficiently if we keep emotions out of it." Emily regarded him for a moment. She heard the sentence that had been used to usher countless women out of what was rightfully theirs. She did not argue. She simply opened the folder. "I prefer precision," she said. Emotion only clouds the page. He watched as she arranged the documents in a neat progression. The draft from Harrison and Blake, the printouts of travel confirmations, the photographs from the hidden profile, and finally the page she had printed with a single paragraph centered on the white. Business appreciation and misconduct valuation. Jason's gaze sharpened. He lifted the first sheet and read with the efficient concentration of someone trained to extract essence. His pen moved quickly. When he reached the photographs, he paused, choices warring across his features. Duty to a client met duty to the truth, and both demanded different forms of courage. He turned the picture slightly, angling it away from other patrons, and continued to read. "What exactly am I looking at here?" he asked. "Admissible evidence," Emily said. "The profile is linked to Mr. Cole's secondary email. Timestamps align with conference dates. The woman is a former employee. There is more if you need it." He nodded once, without commitment. Then he read the clause. His lips formed the words silently, and when he finished, he read them again, slower, as if the language might alter if given time. He set the page down and folded his hands. "Your husband did not disclose this clause to me," he said. The room seemed to hold its breath. The maple flickered against the glass, a barista tamped espresso in the distance. Emily allowed silence to complete the sentence. Jason took up his phone and typed a brief message with both thumbs, respectful and urgent. He waited. The device vibrated. He glanced at the screen, then at Emily again, the careful mask of professional distance settling across his face as if it weighed something. "I need a moment," he said. He stepped to the far corner near the pastry case and made a call. Emily watched the way his shoulders squared when the partner answered, the way he adjusted his tone from confident to careful. She did not strain to hear the words. She did not need to. She had been on that end of the line. She knew the cadence of a conversation in which a new fact changes the spine of a case. He returned after 3 minutes that felt like a measured hour. "My firm will review the disclosure history," he said. "I cannot discuss strategy, but I want this to be respectful. You will hear from us regarding the next steps." Emily slid the clause back toward him with 2 fingers. "Respectful begins with a complete file," she said. "You might want to check your client's full disclosure before you represent him." It was not a threat. It was a direction. Jason nodded. Understood. For a moment they sat without speaking, 2 professionals separated by a table and the stark difference between what a client had told one of them and what a marriage had taught the other. Emily saw that he was not unkind. He was simply unprepared for the story that paper could tell. She gathered her documents with care. The folder made a soft sound as it closed, a final period placed on a scene that would send ripples outward. She stood. "Thank you for your time," she said. "Miss Carson," he said, almost as an admission, almost as an apology, "you are very thorough." "That is my job," she replied. "It is also how I survive." She left him there with his pen, his notes, and a conscience that had just been given instructions. Outside, the evening had cooled. The city carried the slate-blue hush of winter coming. Emily walked the block without hurry, letting the air settle her pulse. Anger did not sharpen her now. Focus did. She replayed the meeting in small fragments. The moment the clause reached his eyes, the pause before the call, the measured return. Each detail affirmed what she already knew. Her case did not need spectacle. It needed light. Her phone vibrated as she reached the corner. A new email arrived from a private address at Harrison and Blake. The subject line was concise. Representation. She opened it in the glow of a street lamp. "Miss Carson, this is to inform you that I will be withdrawing from representation of Mr. Ryan Cole due to a potential conflict of interest discovered during internal review. Formal notice will be filed with the court within 24 hours. Jason Miller." She read it twice. The second time, she allowed herself a single, steady breath. She saved the message and slipped the phone into her coat. Across the street, a bus pulled away from the curb and revealed Ryan standing near the curb, as if conjured by the very act of naming him. He wore the same gray coat he used for client meetings and the expression of a man who believed he had already won. He did not see her at first. When he did, surprise flickered, then hardened into a narrow glare that would have once sent heat rushing to her throat. He crossed without looking at the light. "What did you do?" he said, stopping too close. "What did you say to him?" Emily met his eyes and felt nothing tilt. The ground held. "I presented the truth," she said. "You might try it." "You are pulling strings," he said. "You think you can poison the well. You cannot take my company." She waited a beat, letting the night receive his claim and find it hollow. "I am not taking your company," she said. "I am honoring the agreement you signed." His mouth tightened. He looked as if he might speak again, but no argument came. The bus roared past, leaving the scent of fuel and the tremor of passing weight. A row of windows lit up across the street, each a small rectangle of other lives, other stories. Emily stepped back, giving him the distance he had demanded in every action that led them here. "You will hear from me," he said, almost to himself as if rehearsing control. "You already have," she answered. She turned away and walked toward the light, not quickly and not triumphantly, but with the calm of someone who has set a mechanism in motion and trusts it to do what it was built to do. It began as a murmur and became a chorus before noon. A colleague slid a phone across Emily's desk with an apologetic tilt of the head. On the screen, a glossy business blog featured Ryan's profile photo, cropped and brightened, beside a headline that pulsed with accusation. "Prominent entrepreneur faces gold-digging divorce. Wife seeks half of company." The article was a careful arrangement of insinuations. It quoted sources close to the matter, described Emily as an ambitious attorney, leveraging personal ties to the legal community, and hinted that she had planned this outcome for years. It did not name the clause. It did not name the evidence. It did not need to. It simply placed a stain and stepped away. By mid-afternoon, 2 more outlets echoed the same language. A podcaster repeated the phrases like beads on a string. In the elevator, a pair of associates fell quiet as she entered. Someone cleared a throat and said good morning at 4 o'clock. Emily read each line the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. She recognized the structure. A small PR shop, quick to sell a narrative for a fee, nimble enough to weave a story without touching the facts. She felt a slow burn rise beneath her breastbone, not of rage but of recognition. She had met this tactic in other rooms, wrapped in other words. It could damage a reputation. It could not alter a contract. She closed the browser and opened her drafting software. The document that appeared on the screen was stark and clean, each heading a narrow white road through a dense forest. "Motion for discovery." She typed the caption, the case number, the parties' names. She stated the relief sought in plain language that a tired judge could read without squinting. She requested production of business records, payroll, expense reports, board minutes, shareholder communications, and any correspondence with a former employee named Chloe Hart. She requested authentication of social media activity under the alias Ryan Blake and travel reimbursements surrounding specific conference dates. She did not accuse. She did not speculate. She itemized. The afternoon light tilted slowly toward blue. She reviewed, refined, and printed. When the first copy slid from the machine, she checked the numbers again and signed with a pen that did not shake. She assembled the exhibits, measured the tabs, and placed everything in a neat red well. She scanned once more. Then she walked the papers to the clerk's office herself. The courthouse smelled faintly of stone and paper. The clerk, a woman with kind eyes and a professional weariness, accepted the stack, stamped the first page, and said, "You will receive the hearing date by email." Her tone held no drama. It felt like ballast. When Emily stepped back into the cold, her phone rang. Ryan's name filled the screen. She let it ring twice, then answered. "Emily," he said, his voice bright with the self-control of a man managing an audience, "I saw some things today. You have made a mistake." She listened. A bus sighed at the curb. A siren sang far away. "You are destroying my business," he said, the brightness cracking. "These rumors are hurting us because you are pushing this. Pull back the discovery request. We can negotiate quietly." "No," Emily said, her voice level. "I am not destroying your business. You did the moment you hid the truth." Silence. She heard him inhale, hold the breath, and attempt a different angle. "You do not want to make enemies in my world," he said softly. "There are doors that do not open again. There are doors that never should have closed," she answered. "I am asking for records, not favors." He laughed once, without humor. "You think paper will save you. I think paper will save the facts," she said, and ended the call. That evening, the hearing date arrived. The court granted a short schedule for limited discovery and ordered both parties to produce financial documents within 10 days. The order was not dramatic. It was exact. Emily printed it and pinned it above her desk, beside the clause she had underlined. equitable distribution, and fair market value. Two lines that did not change their meaning in the wind. The next days unfolded with methodical rhythm. A courier delivered a partial set of company records from Ryan's counsel, accompanied by a letter promising more. The numbers did not match what Ryan had claimed in his public interviews. Several expenses were redacted in a way that invited inquiry. She marked them with a pencil and placed yellow flags on the pages. Her pulse was steady, her sleep measured by the silence of a house that now belonged entirely to her. Meanwhile, the stories multiplied. A thread on a forum dissected her motives. A smaller site published a photo from years ago, miscaptioned to suit a rumor. In the break room, someone asked whether she was really going after half. She answered with a nod toward the coffee machine and said she preferred tea. The person blinked, confused. She smiled and left. On the third morning, a new message arrived from the PR firm that had shaped the narrative. It was brief and formal. Ms. Carson, this firm has terminated its contract with Mr. Cole, effective immediately, due to misrepresentations identified during an internal review. We regret any inconvenience caused. Waterside Media Relations. She read the note twice. She responded with one sentence acknowledging receipt. She did not celebrate. She continued to work. At noon, her assistant knocked and placed a larger envelope on the desk. It was from one of Ryan's major clients. The letter inside expressed concern about recent public allegations and requested clarification regarding the stability of Ryan's leadership. It copied 3 board members. The words were neutral and cold, like rain on metal. In the afternoon, Emily received the remaining financials. The pattern was unmistakable. A sequence of unusual payments aligned with the dates of travel and with cards linked to the alias. There were messages referencing conference hospitality that did not describe any conference. She built a chart that mapped each entry to each photograph, each receipt to each timestamp. The white wall became a quiet constellation of proof. At dusk, her phone vibrated again. A message from an unknown number waited on the lock screen. She opened it. Emily, I am sorry. This is Chloe. I am leaving the city. I believed him. I believed that you were cold and that he was lonely. I believed the story he told because I wanted to. I see it now. You do not owe me anything. You need to know that he told me he would fix the articles. He said he could shape the truth. I wanted to believe that too. You are not the person they say you are. See, Emily sat very still. The room had turned the gray of the hour before lamps. She read the message again, then placed the phone face down. Grief rose and receded, the tide she had learned to let pass. Compassion touched the edge of anger and did not erase it, only steadied its hand. She stood and walked to the window. The city glowed softly as if lit from within. Somewhere, a door would close behind a young woman carrying a suitcase she could barely afford. Somewhere, another door would open to a boardroom where reputations were weighed with scales that pretended to be objective. Emily returned to the desk and laid the court order beside the clause. 2 quiet instruments, aligned now like parallel rails. The next morning would bring depositions and questions that did not flinch. For tonight, there was only the measured breath of a house at rest, and the knowledge that the counterattack had ended not with a headline, but with a line of numbers that told the truth without raising its voice. Morning entered the courthouse through high windows, pale and impartial. The corridors smelled of paper and polish, of steps taken by people who carried endings in envelopes. Emily arrived early, a navy dress beneath a charcoal coat, her hands empty, but for a small notebook and a fountain pen that had never once betrayed her. She did not come to perform. She came to witness the machine of the law do what it was built to do. She would not speak for herself today. She had given that task to a colleague from her firm, a calm litigator named Laura Mendez, whose voice held a steady center even when storms gathered. In the holding room, Laura reviewed the binders one last time. Each tab glowed like a marker on a map: prenuptial agreement, discovery responses, financial statements, independent valuation, exhibits. Emily glanced over the list and felt a quiet gratitude for order. The fear that had once flooded her bones was now a thin echo in a distant room. Ryan arrived without an entourage. The gray coat hung loose at his shoulders. His eyes were hollow from weeks without sleep or truth. He carried a single legal pad as if it could still rescue him. When he saw Emily, he paused, as if expecting her to turn away first. She did not move. She offered no stare and no smile, only the stillness of someone who had set down a burden and refused to pick it up again. Inside the courtroom, the benches filled with a polite hush. The judge entered and the clerk called the case. On one side, Laura stood with a binder open to the prenuptial clause. On the other side, Ryan adjusted his tie and lifted his chin with the effort of a man trying to keep the last inch of water from his mouth. The first witness was the independent valuation expert. He was a compact man with careful hair and a patience that suggested long hours inside spreadsheets. He testified with plain language. He described the company's growth, the fair market value at the date of separation, and the method he used to account for appreciation that occurred during the marriage. He did not gild numbers. He planted them. The judge nodded once, took notes, and asked two clarifying questions that fit together like joined metal. Laura introduced the clause. She read it as she might read a compass, steady, exact, without dramatics. In the event that marital misconduct is proven by admissible evidence, any appreciation in value of the operating business owned by either party during the marriage shall be subject to equitable distribution at 50% of fair market value, determined by an independent valuation as of the date of separation. The words did what they had been written to do. They did not raise their voice. They stood. Ryan rose for cross-examination. He tried to quarrel with the method, then with the dates, then with the concept of appreciation itself, as if time could be persuaded to pretend it had not passed. The expert remained courteous and unmoved. He explained assumptions. He pointed to the documents. He invited the judge to see the math and not the man. Next came the evidence that had opened the door. Laura presented authenticated screenshots from the profile under the name Ryan Blake, travel reimbursements that aligned to the day, lodging expenses that aligned to the night, and a chain of messages that did not shout but did not lie. She offered each exhibit with a number and no commentary. The clerk marked them. The judge read. The room remained still. Emily watched her life reframed as a sequence. She felt no thrill as proof crossed from assertion to fact. She felt the sober relief of accuracy. Grief stirred once, like the last leaf on a winter branch, and then was quiet again. Ryan spoke in his own defense. He did not deny the profile. He called it a mistake, and then a misunderstanding, and then a private matter. He pointed to the years he had worked, the jobs he had created, the deals he had secured. He said he had earned his company alone. He said he would not be punished for the failure of love. The judge listened with the patience that the robe requires. There was no visible judgment and no visible sympathy. There was only attention. When Ryan finished, the silence felt wider than any speech. Laura stood for closing remarks and summarized the architecture. She did not attack him. She did not praise her client. She pointed to the agreement they had both signed. She pointed to the evidence that met the standard of proof. She pointed to the valuation that stood on its own feet. She asked the court to enforce the clause as written. Then she sat. The air in the room seemed to hold a single long note as the judge turned the pages once more. Outside, a siren passed far away, a thin line of sound that did not enter. The judge spoke. The prenuptial agreement is valid and enforceable. The clause at issue is not punitive. It is a valuation mechanism tied to proved misconduct and to equitable distribution. The evidence is sufficient. The court orders that Mrs. Carson is entitled to 50% of the appreciated value of Mr. Cole's business as of the date of separation, as determined by the independent valuation the court accepts today. There was no outcry. There was no applause. Paper moved. Pens lifted. The clerk recorded the order. A bailiff coughed. A woman in the last row wiped one tear with the back of her hand as if embarrassed by the honesty of her body. Emily exhaled. It was not a sob, not even a sigh, but a release of air that had been held for too many months. She placed her palm on the notebook and felt the faint texture of its cover like a promise that she would not forget who she had been and who she had become. Ryan's shoulders dropped. For an instant, there was a reflection of the man she had married, the young entrepreneur who had once believed that work could build a life and not only a fortress. Then it was gone. He looked at the door, then at the ceiling, as if searching for a higher court that might lift the weight. There was none. In the corridor, Laura touched Emily's arm. "It is done," she said. Emily nodded. "Thank you." She did not seek triumph. She felt closure move through her like a careful tide that cleans the shoreline without erasing its shape. On the courthouse steps, the winter light was clean and thin. She stood for a moment and looked at the sky. The city went on with its errands. Cars idled at red lights. A dog barked twice. A man in a blue scarf hurried past with a paper bag that smelled of bread. Life continued, as it always had, indifferent and faithful. Her phone vibrated. A new email appeared with a subject line that steadied her mouth into a line she could not name. Subject, "Can we talk?" It was from Ryan. She did not open it. She watched the screen dim and returned to the reflection of her face. She slipped the phone into her coat and stepped away from the courthouse, not quickly, not slowly, but at the pace of a person who has decided that the rest of the road belongs to her. A year later, the light in Portland had changed. Spring arrived early, softening the edges of the city with rain and renewal. In a quiet district near the river, a glass door bore a new name in understated silver letters: Carson and Associates, Family Law and Legal Planning. Inside, the office breathed calm confidence. Sunlight fell through sheer curtains onto rows of case files, neat and dignified. On one wall hung a framed quotation that Emily had chosen herself: "Strength is not the absence of pain, but the mastery of it." She moved through the space with the unhurried grace of someone who had rebuilt not just a career, but an identity. Her voice carried easily across the room, steady, low, assured. A young woman sat across from her now, nervously clutching the strap of her bag. She could not have been more than 26. "I know you are in love," Emily said gently, her tone more mentor than lawyer. "And I know how cold a contract can sound when your heart is warm. But a prenuptial agreement does not diminish love. It defines the space where love must coexist with reality. A contract will not save your marriage, but it will save you if love fails." The client nodded, tears held carefully behind resolve. Emily handed her a tissue, not as an attorney, but as a woman who had once stood in that very chair believing that promises were ironclad because they had been whispered sincerely. When the meeting ended, the young woman rose, steadier now, and thanked her. As the door closed, Emily allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her gaze drifted toward the window, where a faint drizzle had begun to fall. She thought of how the city looked that day a year ago when she had stepped out of the courthouse with the order in her hand, and the world ahead of her, clean and unfamiliar. The sound of the rain carried her memory to another window, far across town. Ryan sat alone at a modest desk in a co-working office, surrounded by other entrepreneurs whose ambitions filled the air like static. The once proud nameplate of Cole Logistics was gone. The company had been reorganized, halved, and quietly sold to new investors. He worked now as a consultant, offering advice to the same industry he had once commanded. The room was smaller, the view narrower. Outside, a row of birches leaned in the rain. He checked his inbox, though he already knew what was there: invoices, reminders, polite rejections. In the corner of the screen, a single email thread sat unopened. The subject line read, "Final settlement confirmation, Carson versus Cole." He stared at it for a moment, then clicked away. His reflection on the dark screen was pale and quiet, the face of a man learning the slow art of humility. At that same hour, in her office, Emily reviewed the foundation paperwork for a new project, a nonprofit division offering legal literacy workshops for women. The idea had begun as a small promise she made to herself after the trial to help others find the courage to read their own stories in legal language before someone else rewrote them. Her assistant, Clara, entered with a steaming cup of coffee. "You have a speaking invitation next week," she said. "Oregon Women's Alliance. The topic is empowerment through legal awareness." Emily smiled faintly. "That seems fitting." Clara hesitated. "Will you mention your own case?" Only as proof, Emily replied, that justice is not an abstract word. It is a decision we make every morning to stand, to speak, to sign our names where they matter. When the office quieted, Emily opened the drawer of her desk. Inside lay the leather folder that once held her prenuptial agreement. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, its ink faded, but its authority undiminished. She touched it lightly, not as a relic of pain, but as evidence of endurance. Her mind drifted to Ryan for a brief instant, not with bitterness, but with the detached compassion of one who has survived the storm and can finally watch the clouds without flinching. He had once told her that she was not enough. The words had cut deeply then. Now they felt almost weightless. He once told me I was not enough, she thought, the words forming silently. It turns out I was more than he could handle. She closed the drawer and stood, moving to the window. Outside, the rain was thinning into light. The glass caught her reflection, a face neither triumphant nor weary, simply whole. A gust of wind pushed the clouds apart, and a shaft of sunlight crossed the office, warm and deliberate, striking the silver letters on the door. Carson and Associates gleamed for an instant, as if the city itself had chosen to acknowledge the transformation. Emily reached for her coat. She had an appointment downtown, a seminar for young lawyers beginning their careers. As she stepped outside, the street shimmered from the morning rain, every puddle catching a fragment of the sky. The rhythm of her heels on the pavement was steady, the sound of someone moving forward without hesitation. At the crosswalk, she paused. The air smelled of whetstone and coffee. A cyclist passed, laughing, his voice echoing briefly before dissolving into the hum of traffic. Across the street, a small bookstore displayed a sign in its window, "Stories of Renewal, this week's theme." She smiled and crossed when the light changed. In the distance, the courthouse stood like a memory, its columns softened by time and weather. Once, it had been the end of something. Now, it was only a landmark on a longer road. As she turned the corner, sunlight touched her hair, and the frame held her for a moment, walking forward, coat catching the wind, face lifted slightly toward a future no longer bound by fear or betrayal. For the first time in years, her steps carried no echo of the past. Only rhythm, only purpose, only life beginning again. Every story of loss, if told to its end, becomes a story of return. Not to what was, but to who we are when everything else has fallen away. Emily's journey was not about divorce, nor victory, nor revenge. It was about remembering that truth, when spoken quietly and lived steadfastly, has its own gravity. It pulls us back to center. She had once believed that love was a shelter built for two. She learned instead that love, like law, must be upheld by honesty or it collapses beneath its own weight. When Ryan chose deceit, the foundation cracked. But in that fracture, light entered, a narrow, steady beam that revealed not ruin, but the outline of a stronger life waiting to be built. Forgiveness did not come to her wrapped in warmth. It came cold, like rain, washing away illusion before anything could bloom again. She did not forgive to free him. She forgave to free herself from anger, from doubt, from the shadow of the woman who once measured her worth by someone else's reflection. What remains of her story is not the courtroom or the claws. It is the quiet dignity of rebuilding with her own hands, the courage to look at brokenness and still believe in beauty. We all meet a moment when the life we plan dissolves, and the question that remains is the same one she faced. Will you stay where it ended, or will you walk toward where it begins again? If her story reached you, if a part of it reminded you of your own hidden strength, then pause and let that recognition speak. Maybe you have stood where she stood between heartbreak and rebirth, and maybe you, too, have found that pain is not the opposite of power, but the doorway to it. Tell us what you would have done, or what you have learned when trust was tested. Share your thoughts below. Your words might be the lantern for someone still walking through their dark. And if you believe, as Emily learned to believe, that every ending carries the whisper of a new beginning, then stay with us. There are more stories to tell, more voices to rise, more hearts to remember that resilience is not rare, only quiet. Because sometimes the most extraordinary thing a person can do is simply to begin again.